All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our discussion on the lead up to the American Civil War. So, last time we talked about some of the societal issues that were going on, Jackson and things that he did. All right, so this time is going to be some conflicts, compromises that are going to lead up to crisis that are going to divide the nation. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the nation during the 1840s and 50s is going to be struggling to resolve what is called sectional issues. And we're going to get a number of crises and compromises due to sectional issues. And these crises that are going to come from it are going to take place because of the admission of new states into the Union, new states to the country, and in the decades before the Civil War. And it's basically going to boil down to how many free states and how many slave states there are, and trying to keep the numbers balanced in Congress. All right, so sectional issues. This is what I mean by sectional issue. So this is basically, the North, the South, and the West. Oklahoma down here in yellow, this is basically Indian territory. This is the reservations that people from like the Trail of Tears were being relocated to. All right, so in the North, what do they want? And in the South, what do they want? And the West, well, the West is basically, their future is determined by these compromises between the North and the South. Now, economic divisions between North and South. The North, primarily industrial manufacturing of goods. They got factories, and they are really liking the high protective tariffs so that their goods are cheaper and are able to be sold more than the foreign goods that are being brought into the country. So the protective tariff is actually putting a tax on the foreign goods, making them cost more. So it is a way to try and deter people from buying foreign and buying American. In the South, economics is basically agricultural still, slave-based labor with the plantations all over the Atlantic and Deep South. We're going to have a lot of farms out in the Appalachian Mountains. And they are strongly opposing the high tariffs because they like doing trade with the foreign nations like the British, like the French, like all those people. And so because the manufactured goods that are imported with this tariff, they are too expensive, and they would rather not buy from the North. All right, the expansion of slavery and states' rights. So the US is moving westward, manifest destiny and everything. So conflict is going to appear over the issue of slavery. And it's going to boil down to the point to where the country is basically about to be ripped apart. So the admission of new states is going to lead to conflict again and again and again over whether that new state would be a slave state, allowing slavery, or if it would be a free state where it prohibits slavery. So a lot of compromises are going to be tried out to keep the balance of power between the two types. First one is the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The territory of Missouri, which is right here on the map, it's to the west of Illinois and north of Arkansas, they are wanting to come in as a slave state. And so the compromise is basically that, all right, they can come in as a slave state, and Maine up here, which up until 1820 was a part of Massachusetts, is now going to be its own independent state. Another part of this compromise is going to deal with a border. So what we're going to have is a line being drawn on the map that's going to run east to west, so from right to left. And it's going to go through the Louisiana Territory and basically to the ocean. It's going to follow this line right here, right across the bottom of Missouri, all the way across to the Pacific coast. And anything south of this line is going to become, slave states when they eventually, go for statehood. And anything north of that line would be a free state. So all this up here would be eligible to be, slave free. Now, we're going to have other crises, obviously, because I told you this is a very tumultuous time. So South Carolina, led by John C. Calhoun, this gentleman right here, he is going to oppose the tariff of abominations, basically a tariff that is going to reduce cotton exports to England. Now, this was a time when the Industrial Revolution is going on over in England, and they are in need of American cotton because the textile industry, the clothing industry, is booming over there. So Calhoun is going to devise the nullification theory because, it's going to basically get rid of the tariffs on the cotton exports. And it's going to basically state, this nullification theory, that the rights of the states to nullify national law. So basically the states can pick and choose what laws they wish to follow. Now, this is during the presidency of Andrew Jackson. He doesn't put up with any BS, as you can figure. He threatens South Carolina that he will send in troops if they don't get their act together. All right. So he is going to convince Congress also to pass a compromise tariff to keep the union together, and basically, there'll still be a tariff, still be a tax, but it just won't be as high. It'll be a more reasonable rate now. That works for everybody. All right, the Compromise of 1850. This one, California wants to enter as a free state. And while the new southwestern territories acquired from Mexico, the Spanish-American War, well, the Mexican-American War, I should say, and it is going to have them decide, those territories, if they will be free or slave states through popular sovereignty. All right? Popular sovereignty is basically the people of those territories get to vote on what they want to be, whether it's a free state or a slave state. Also, during this compromise, the slave trade is going to be banned in Washington, D.C. Slavery is still allowed in D.C., but you can no longer buy slaves from a market, essentially, like auctioning them off. Also, stricter fugitive slave laws are going to be adopted. So basically, if a slave gets caught in a northern state, they immediately are going to be shipped back down south to their owner. Stuff like that. Now, only 4 short years later, we're going to get the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And this is going to repeal the Missouri Compromise line, that division line, by giving the people in Kansas and Nebraska the choice of whether to allow slavery in their states or not. Popular sovereignty. These 2 territories are going to vote on it. All right, this is going to produce a lot of fighting, a lot of bloody fighting in Kansas, called Bleeding Kansas. That's a nickname that this got because of how many people got killed. We're going to have fighting between pro and anti-slavery forces, and it's essentially going to be like this huge gang war going on, where people from Nebraska are going over to Kansas, and there's one instance where a town got blown to smithereens from a cannon fire that one of the sides had. It was just bloody fighting. The guy, John Brown, who was an abolitionist by any means necessary type of guy, he made a name for himself during this Bleeding Kansas event. And he is going to become nationwide known as like a terrorist because he is going, well, I'll be getting to him in a little bit. So anyway, before we get back to Brown, some more of the abolitionist stuff. We're going to have slave revolts in Virginia, led by Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser. All right, this fed the white fears in the South of slave rebellions and will lead to harsher slave laws and fugitive slave laws. Now, as an example, Nat Turner, he was a runaway slave, obviously, and he and his followers would actually break into the homes of like white plantation owners and white farmers, just white people in general, and they would murder people in their sleep. And when they were eventually caught, they were, of course, executed. But yeah, bloody, bloody business when you're talking about Nat Turner for the slave revolts. All right. Now, outraged Northerners, Dred Scott decision. That is a Supreme Court case that, basically set back the abolitionist movement by decades. This is basically the story of a guy takes his slave, Dred Scott, and goes into a free territory, a territory where there is no slavery. And the slave, Dred Scott, he basically is like, all right, we live in an area now where slavery is not allowed. I guess that means I'm not a slave anymore. And his master, of course, is like, yes, you're still my slave. It goes to court. It eventually goes to the Supreme Court. And what is going to happen is the court is going to rule that no black man was a citizen of the country and that slaves could be taken to free territories. It basically gets rid of any reason for having any of the compromises, saying like, because if a place is free and you bring your slave there, they're still a slave, even if you're living there. So what's the point then? All right. 1854, the Republican Party is born. It is created. Abraham Lincoln is an early joiner of the Republican Party. He's going to oppose the spread of slavery to new territories, such as Kansas and Nebraska Act. So he's going to be pushing for the people there to vote for being free states. The early Republican Party was part of a coalition of a lot of other groups that were basically trying to counter the Democrat ideas of trying to keep the old ways going. All right. Now, Lincoln is going to make a name for himself during the 1850s. And this is going to be primarily due to the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So he is a Western Territory Republican. He's going to have a number of debates against Stephen Douglas, who was a Northern Democrat. And this is while running for the U.S. Senate in the state of Illinois, 1858. Lincoln is going to oppose the spread of slavery into new states, and Douglas is going to keep going for popular sovereignty, people voting. Lincoln is going to lose this Senate election, but he becomes nationally known. People start to know who he is, and that is what he's going to use, that momentum, in his presidential run in 2 years. All right, that is where we are leaving off today. When we come back next time, we're getting into, after our quiz, we're going to be getting into the Civil War itself, 1860 to 1865. All right, see you next time.